Hi, I'm Chris Liversidge, the CEO of QueryClick, and today I'm talking about unbundling Google Ads and Facebook for successful marketing attribution in 2021. I have close to 20 years working with websites and 15 in performance marketing, being an early employee in what became the largest independent search marketing agency in the world before it was sold to Publicis. I founded QueryClick 12 years ago with a focus on performance marketing targeting enterprise customers. 7 years ago, we began developing what is now Corvidae, our attribution platform, in response to a question about our performance marketing's impact on store footfall from B&Q and then Tesco, so two large UK retailers. Along the way, we discovered some truly unique problems that were applicable to the newly emerging SaaS machine learning tools, and we decided to invest further. And today, I'm delighted to announce the public launch of Corvidae to one and all. In this session, I'll look at the technicalities of attribution and why we as marketers are being shortchanged by the solutions available to us today. Also, I'll show how we can get huge value from accurate attribution in Google and Facebook in particular, using techniques that we've also applied to digital and linear TV and display. So let's get cracking. So first of all, what is it that we are doing differently to the rest of the attribution market with the Corvidae platform? I'm going to break that down and get into the nitty-gritty of how you can create really good attribution outcomes. So first of all, I think it's important to think about where we are spending in silo as marketers today. Now, there's a pretty clear winner, or clear winners, I should say, in digital marketing today. So the vast majority of digital media spend is either in Facebook or in Google. You can see that in the UK, it's in fact 93% of digital spend for the vast majority of brands. And of course, that's created a bit of a problem because while Facebook was a relatively new channel, we were all able to spend in that platform and get relatively good returns on advertising spend, or ROAS. But as Facebook has become more saturated over the last 5 years, for many of us, what that's meant is that we are now no longer getting quite the same bang for the buck that we used to. And also, we are finding that we are not sure how we can either improve our ROAS or increase our growth without just spinning the wheels. The same has always been true for Google Ads. It's had more than a decade, coming up to 2 decades of algorithmic optimization to make sure that the prices are just at the point where it becomes a little bit painful for you to pay for that click. And so given that that's been one of the largest drivers for digital for such a long period of time, up until Facebook came along, for most of us in 2021, the biggest problem that we have is understanding how these different silos interact and how we can optimize across them. This is where attribution can solve that most acute of problems. So here, to illustrate the problem of operating in silo, is the same activity in Facebook as reported by Facebook in its one-day click, one-day view attribution model, which is its most conservative attribution model. The default is actually 7-day view and click. And the actual click revenue reported in the web analytics platform being used by this particular customer. So you can see that the web analytics click data shows £20,000 of revenue, whereas the Facebook attribution model, which is also trying to value the individual impressions of each ad, is reporting nearly £450,000 of revenue for the same activity. So clearly, the truth must be somewhere in the middle. But the question for all of us really is where exactly, and what can I then do to optimize that channel? Now, I will get into answering that question in this presentation. Before I do that, I just want to step back a little bit. QueryClick co-founded a census-wide report into attribution. So we helped get that out to 200 marketers making tactical decisions with at least £10 million per annum in media budget under their control. So we're really surveying here the decision makers for optimization in particular, less the CMO, more the decision maker. And there's a range of questions in that survey, and it's downloadable via the link in this presentation. But ultimately, they sum up to this outcome, which is that fundamentally attribution is not providing value for people trying to make tactical marketing decisions. In fact, 90%, more than 90% of those 200 marketers ultimately said that they could not get good outcomes and were forced to make their decisions using essentially last click. Now, last click is like attribution, but you've given up on trying to attribute in any meaningful way. It is a simple rules-based model and gives 100% of the value of a conversion to the last interaction, or more commonly the last interaction except for a channel called direct, which is simply someone entering a URL into the browser. So what were the kind of key outcomes from that survey? We've talked a little bit about the first one here, which is the silo, operating in silo and walled gardens, and the challenges that presents. As a result of that, it's impossible largely to get very good and accurate single customer views. As a result of that, you'll find often multiple single customer views in organizations. So the CRM system likely will have one. CDPs have come in to try and bridge that gap a little bit more. Acquisition will operate with a different view of single customer through its sessions and so on. Again, that leaves marketers to make just a tactical decision using last click in most cases, and I'm sure many of you watching this are in that boat. And we have now hit a wall as a group where cost per acquisitions have become largely saturated, meaning ad costs are driven ever upwards, making it more difficult to return positive ROAS, return on advertising spend. We all intuitively know that we are cannibalizing ourselves in the different channels that we market in, by which I mean we know that we're showing multiple ads to individuals that aren't necessarily required for them to convert, but we have no capability of understanding where that is happening. And finally here, offline. Offline is, as a whole, the largest marketing channel, and we very rarely see a well-joined up data point with offline activity in our attribution models. It's likely if you're in a larger organizations, you will undertake econometric studies, which are obviously of fantastic value and provide deep insight, but are very infrequent, often very expensive, and ultimately rarely, if ever, included in the tactical decision making that you then undertake digitally. So those are kind of the 6 core challenges that we sought to try and resolve with the launch of our Corvidae product out to the public. And I'm going to talk about that difference in approach that we've taken now, and then kind of help understand how attribution works today, where the challenges or flaws are in those approaches, and what we're doing differently. So you can see on this slide the most common form of attribution that goes beyond that simple rules-based approach used by analytics packages and ad tech today, and specifically used by Google and Facebook as well. So the Shapley value, so Lloyd Shapley is a mathematician operating in the world of game theory, and ultimately created the algorithm that you can see, or the equation, I suppose, really you can see here, which is largely taking the same approach as another common data-driven model, which is a Markov chain model. So Markov and Shapley together probably are 98% of all quote-unquote data-driven attribution models that you'll find in the attribution marketplace and in the analytics marketplace and in much of the ad tech as well. So how do they work? We can see here an illustration of the putting together of a Shapley value. They both operate by looking at chains of conversion and comparing those chains together, and the differences in those chains for the individual items within them are calculated, and ultimately that is how the value is derived for the attribution model. So if we walk through this example here, this is a Shapley model. The start of the chain at the top is a search. Someone's performed a search and seen your ad, and the end of the chain, you have sent them an email. That chain on average converts at 2% in this example. The chain underneath it, in between those two touch points, has a display ad being presented to that individual. And those chains on average convert at 3%. And the difference between 2 and 3% is an improvement of 50%. And so that 50% value is given to the display ad that was presented in that chain. So ultimately, this is the method used to derive value and present an attribution outcome in most of the data-driven attribution models that you will come across. Whilst perfectly fine as an approach and certainly mathematically robust, it has two major drawbacks for marketers. And I'm going to step through each of those now. So the first drawback is illustrated here. This is a chart showing the touch points that exist in the raw click stream. So that's the flow of data provided by an analytics pixel back to an analytics platform, Google Analytics in this instance. And it's for a £100 million a year turnover brand, multinational brand. And in here, the data has been segmented by the country that pixel is reporting itself to be from. Now, if this were 100% accurate data, there would be no red highlighting going on anywhere over the top of this chart. And every single bar in the chart would be associated with one of the countries that brand operates within. As you can see, there's a number of different causes or reported countries being presented by this raw click stream. Now, this is a well-configured, well-deployed analytics tag. It is not a question of the tagging itself or the deployment of the tag itself creating this problem. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The Wiggle deployment, when this was generated, was a very good quality deployment, accurate in all common senses of the word. The problem, or the flaw, if you like, that this chart is highlighting is a flaw that we have found to be common to every analytics deployment. So I have another example coming up shortly, but we have seen 99% of the time a result like this when we look at the raw analytics clickstream for a new customer. So what's going on here? Why is there so much data that isn't returning the way we would expect it? Well, ultimately, those broken sessions, that broken data is being generated by a range of different causes, but principally it's being created by multiple sessions being generated by the analytics tag itself due to session dwell times being too long, due to sessions being created as direct touch points incorrectly, and also due to things like a multi-device and devices which have cookie blocking interrupting the data. And this insight, if you like, as to the quality of the data was an early discovery for us 7 years ago when we started looking at the problem of attribution. And so the first piece of work that we really intensely followed was to look at moving away from taking the raw clickstream data, that pixel data, as gospel, and instead looking to reprocess it or rebuild it in our terminology using a predictive modeling approach. So the raw data is a deterministic data set. It relies on somewhere in the tag a bit of information being used so that that tag can be understood. And so things like geolocation would fall under that. But with predictive models, instead, you're simply using those as signals, and you're then trying to apply dynamic processes to see if you can better replace those data with new data that gives a better outcome. And better in this example, because it's a predictive example, would be a better prediction of today from the historic data that's been provided to the model. So much the same way as weather forecasting model works. Here you can see an illustration of one of the successful approaches to predictive modeling that we came upon in those kind of early research days. So this is a random forest machine learning process that's been illustrated, where you're essentially doing near infinite number of A/B tests of different possible paths through the sessions. And ultimately what we're doing there is stitching those sessions together, multiple sessions together, saying, you know, what if these were in fact a continuation of the preceding session? Would I get a better predictive outcome if that were true? And so this machine learning approach goes to a near infinite number of variations, and ultimately the accuracy of its predictive value is used to determine the correct path across all those different sessions. So what we're doing there is from the ground up, we are rebuilding the idea of an individual behind the sessions. So we're looking beyond the devices that are triggering the tags and understanding, based on the behavior that's exhibited and tracked in that pixel, if a session is a continuation of another session or not. And you know, the behavior, the way that you might dwell on a page, your interaction with the different orders of page, the device that you're using, the location of that, all of those bits of information that are captured in the raw click stream are used by this model to ultimately generate replacing data, so completely replacing data that shows a unified session across all those different broken sessions. So how effective is that? Very, very effective, it turns out. Here is a day in the life of Tesco. So Tesco are the UK's largest retailer by turnover. Again, this is back in the early days of our development work. What we found was that using this machine learning process, we were able to make a much larger proportion of the overall data available to be attributed. So remember, this is all pre-attribution. Here we're cleaning up the data, rebuilding the data in our terminology to make the sessions more accurately represent the individual that we would like to attribute against. So you can see that up to 80% of that data is likely to be broken. It certainly is in Tesco's case when we ran this data. And we commonly see between 50 and 80% being true in pretty much every deployment that we've made. So, okay, we've stitched together those sessions using some cool machine learning, but what does that mean from an attribution point of view? Here we have applied a simple Shapley attribution model, like the one described earlier in this presentation, to that restitched data. And it shows you just how different the outcomes are when you join together those sessions. The orange bars in this chart are GA360 data, and the dark blue bars is Corviday's data. And this is the top 6 channels by revenue in a day in the life of Tesco. And one of the standout bits of data there clearly is the amount of revenue that's being removed from direct. Now, it's very common that you will find in your analytics package a disproportionately large amount of revenue will be coming into direct, even if you apply different techniques to try and reduce that amount. So for example, in GA360, Last touch is actually last touch non-direct, i.e. they try and eliminate direct when they're calculating last touch, and yet they still have huge volumes of direct typically coming in, much higher than you would expect, given it's supposed to represent someone just directly putting that URL into the address bar with no referrer. And so you would make quite different decisions with this application of Shapley, for sure. But actually, you are then somewhat limited from that point going forward. So here, for example, the first sort of insight for a marketer making data-savvy decisions would be to look at the overall allocation by channel of media spend. But, kind of once you've done that, what else can you do to optimize those channels? You're actually really limited in terms of your capability to optimize there. You might, based on this data, take media spend away from display and put it into a higher performing channel like paid search off the back of this, but you're only doing that at the channel level. How can you get more granular? How can you get more valuable data for marketers? And indeed, the same is true if we go back to the example we started this presentation with, looking at that 1 day of Facebook activity being reported entirely differently in Facebook on the right compared to the web analytics data on the left. What could we do with that correctly attributed data? I mean, here it is the reality of the revenue generated across Facebook for that particular customer, which is Otti, a mattress retailer. Now, again, I could look at my media spend allocation for Facebook, but over and above that, what else can I do? So this is another outcome that we sort of anticipated when we were in the earlier days of development for Corvidae. And indeed, we spent the last 2 years working with Edinburgh University School of Informatics and Data Science, which is the largest of its type in EMEA, undertaking research, primary research, using deep learning to see if we could get a better, deeper, more granular form of attribution outcome to replace the use of the likes of Shapley and Markov. And indeed, we did get very good outcomes from that research work, which has subsequently been finalized and moved into the commercial proposition of Corvidae. So I want to take you through some of the early outcomes we have from that that we've just recently taken to market. Now, we actually do attribution down to the individual layer in that process, but for the purposes of us marketers and trying to get more value from our media spend, really the action happens at the campaign level. A campaign is where you associate creatives with budget, you put in your bid controls, and you can be extremely granular in your campaign structures to make the absolute most of your media spend for a particular paid channel. So that's where we focused our efforts. Let's look then at some of those campaign level insights that are completely new to market, if you like. These are not attribution insights that you'll be able to find anywhere else today. This is super granular information. It's campaign level information on the left for Facebook and on the right for Google Ads, showing the difference between revenues reported in those ad tech platforms and the attributed revenue outcomes that we're getting from this new process, which generates campaign level attribution. So the dark blue bar is the Corvidae attributed revenue, and the orange bars on the right is Google Ads reported revenue, and the blue bar on the left is Facebook's reported revenue. And you can see there are quite significant differences in some of those campaigns. And let's just drill into one to really dig into how we could then use that for optimization. So on the left here in the Google Ads data for Otti, we can see that there are a number of campaigns which actually return less revenue than their cost. So the 3 furthest campaigns on the left there, you can see basically have negative ROAS, negative return on advertising spend. And on the right, conversely, we have high levels of revenue, attributed revenue, being associated with campaigns with very, very small media spends associated with them. So just to simplify the level of opportunity here, by taking that negative ROAS campaign activity, which represents 22% of the Google Ads spend, and reallocating it to the highest return on advertising spend campaign in the set, we generate another £1.4 million of revenue per annum for Otti. So immediately a much more powerful, actionable insight for the customer. And also you can see, because this is at the campaign level, it enables further campaign development and optimization to be executed and optimized using this attributed data. If we look at the Facebook side of things, this is a different customer, just for a bit of change. So this is a retailer in the UK, Quiz, and this is their Facebook data. And again, you can see we have spend, we have revenue from Facebook in Facebook blue, and then we have revenue from Corvidae in the dark blue, and significant opportunities for optimization. The campaign that's highlighted on the left in the black box is showing 68% less revenue than reported by Facebook. And again, just to reiterate, that is on the one-day click and view attribution model, which Facebook makes available. That's their most parsimonious attribution model. Their default is actually a 7-day click and view, which would drive the Facebook reported revenues much, much higher. And so if we go through the same exercise that we did on the Google Ads campaigns, here we have 34% of spend producing ultimately negative ROAS for the customer. If that were reallocated into the best performing campaign, that generates an extra £1.6 million per year of additional revenue. So we finally have unbundled data silos that represent 93% of overall media spends, and we can start optimizing to great granularity in them. So it's a real result and a vindication of the approach, if you like, the process, and the effort that Corvidae brings to the table to fundamentally rebuild the underlying analytics data that's being provided to it, and then develop individualized attribution chains. So each individual that's captured by the pixel interacts with the pixel and has their multiple sessions joined together, those entities, if you like. Every interaction they have with any bit of content that's in the data is being attributed by this deep learning model. The process is actually called a long short-term memory architecture. It sort of looks a bit like the schematic you can see on the slide here. It's not an algorithm. It's not a formula that you can write out. It is much more like a simple neural network. And so it's a much more powerful approach, more powerful type of machine learning than the rebuilding type that we were looking at earlier. It's a breakthrough. This is proprietary research. We also have global patents on the approaches taken for the rebuilding phase and for this visit level attribution phase using LSTM techniques. So we know that we are the only provider on the market approaching this, and certainly from speaking to marketers on the ground and CMOs, our experience has been that there's a high level of frustration with the attribution market. So I'm confident that there would be quite different results with a deployment of Corvidae in pretty much every instance. And I'm really keen to have conversations and welcome conversations with anyone and everyone who's had good, bad, or indifferent experiences with attribution, and get their thoughts and reflections on the processes and approaches that I've described today. In here, before I move on, I want to just talk a little bit about how we do the joining, this data silo joining. In essence, there's a couple of processes involved in that. So I'll go through step by step, the onboarding and those processes to kind of try and make that a bit clearer. So when we do a fresh deployment of Corviday, we will ingest any enterprise level analytics that exists. So that's typically GA360 or Adobe. We'll also then go ahead and deploy a tag, Corviday tag. Now that's done using containerization. So it is a genuinely first party pixel deployment onto the web properties. And that means that we don't need to worry about cookie Armageddon. And we have the best possible data quality, data fidelity available in the market, and we are future-proofed. We don't require, second, third-party cookies or anything like that for the Corviday attribution process to function. So that's all good. We go through that rebuilding process, which I described at the start of this presentation, where we join multiple broken sessions into one by moving into a probabilistic processing format, which then gives us clean data to feed into stage 2 and 3 of this deployment process, which is feeding that clean session data into the neural network that ultimately generates attribution scores for every interaction that exists in that data set. Now, to do the joining of data silos, it is the same if that process is joining digital or linear. And indeed, we have a number of case studies across all different sorts of marketing channel that we can point you to. And what occurs is essentially markers in the data which overlap. So things like the geolocation, from a lat long perspective, the time down to milliseconds, data that is available, sort of meta information, if you like, that's available within those silos, things like the actual device, the screen size of it, the settings of that display resolution. These markers are used to understand the join session and the join session's probability to engage, where that probability is higher than expected, and there is an overlap between an ad being presented that has the same, geolocation broadly and the same instance in time. So where that ad exists near that session or close to that session or somehow overlaps that session, and that session has a predicted increase in conversion behavior that would line up with them having seen that ad, then that ad is stitched into the journey. So that includes, thinking about impressions that might influence that particular journey. And so that allows things like linear TV to be stitched in much the same way. And ultimately, that is how we are able to unbundle Facebook and Google and all of the most common marketing channels that exist. And we do all of this on Azure. We're gold certified partners with Microsoft in Azure. And in fact, we can provide data down into the common data model that their CDP Dynamics sits on, which is now called the Dataverse. So we can feed data directly into Dataverse for you to have that attribution data available across the entirety of Dynamics if you're already a customer with Microsoft. And if not, we are simply pulling from a RESTful API to create the reports on our front end that you would have access to for your campaign level attribution. And also those APIs can be used for bid automation. So you can do bid monitoring, bid adjustment using those feeds to have attribution data dynamically affect your bid. All of that is processed live in real time, and we think that's the best way to get value from attribution. So to kind of wrap up here, I think really what I've hopefully helped illustrate today is the kind of the flaws inherent in much of the attribution market today. are technical flaws. And with those flaws in existence, I think it's probable that for the vast majority of you, you've had a frustrating time when it comes to attribution, and that is understandable. I think when you consider that 80% or so of the underlying data that's being processed and attributed is broken sessions, broken data, partial views of the actual individual behind those sessions, which ultimately is what we are trying to measure when we go through the process of attribution. And there's clearly powerful implications for getting accurate attribution out the door. Not only can you do kinds of optimization at campaign level on your paid channels that I've described, but also you can start looking at the full cycle of customer journeys. Here we have a wiggly grey line to illustrate a customer journey, each dot representing a different engagement, and the red dots representing conversion points. With accurate attribution, you have a clear picture of that across all the data that you plug into the platform, and that allows you to start eliminating waste wherever it exists and maximizing reach wherever it is most effective from a ROAS perspective. So there we go. That's a whirlwind tour around the mechanics of attribution and the implications of granular visit level attribution that can be aggregated up to allow campaign level optimization. I hope that's been of use, of value to you all, and I really welcome follow-on conversations, discussions, challenges. I think the attribution space is full of some really creative, smart thinkers, and I'm really excited to see what we can all do with this new level of data, this new depth of data that we now have available to us. So thank you very much all for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your sessions today.